for the welcome, June, and thanks everyone for coming. I've seen a few faces here that I hadn't seen before. So I'm going to talk about Carl Jung and the sacred marriage, Hieros Gamos. Was a really big part of Carl Jung's work, but it really came to a special head in 1944. And Dr. Jung had a powerful mystical experience of the sacred marriage. He was 69 years old at the time, that's 17 years before his death. And he wrote in Memory, Streams and Reflections that it is impossible to describe the beauty and intensity of emotion during those visions. They were the most tremendous things I have ever experienced. So there's quite a bit in Memory, Streams and Reflections about this, but there's an extract here that sums up most of it. He said, I was in the Padres Rimenon, the garden of pomegranates. That's a line from the Song of Songs in the Bible, and the garden is mentioned there, the garden of pomegranates. And I was at the wedding of Tippereth and Malkuth. I cannot tell how wonderful it was. I do not know what part I played in it. At bottom, it was myself. I was the marriage. And my beatitude was that of a blissful wedding. There followed the marriage of the Lamb, and these were ineffable states of joy. Angels were present and light. I was myself the marriage of the Lamb. And then there came the last image. The Hieros Gamos was being celebrated, and All-Father Zeus and Hera consummated the mystic marriage. So the marriage visions took three forms. The first, the marriage of Tippereth and Malkuth. These are terms from the Kabbalah. It's an esoteric Hebrew theology. And they're associated with the masculine and feminine aspect of the Jewish God Yahweh. Second, the marriage of the Lamb. This is the marriage of Jesus, the Lamb of God, at the end of time. And third, the marriage of Zeus and Hera. These are, as you know, mythological figures from ancient Greece. So I'm going to talk about each of these marriages a little while, for a while. And I'll be talking a bit about the Kabbalah because not everyone knows what it is. So it'll be a bit of a primer. Those who already know about it, well, you'll just have to rest, I think. Anyway, Tippereth and Malkuth are terms from the Kabbalah tree of life. In simplistic terms, Tippereth, beauty, truth, and Malkuth, kingdom, are aspects of God. Tippereth is the Son of God. Malkuth is all physical reality. It's the cosmos. It's a female aspect of God. And the Hieros Gamos is the marriage between the two. It's an internal marriage within God. Now, Dr. Jung was completely familiar with the Kabbalistic tradition. In fact, some writers think he pinched a lot of his ideas from the Kabbalists. He shared the Kabbalists' intense focus on God as the center of reality. He writes, I find that all my thoughts circle round God like the planets surround the sun, and are as irresistibly attracted by him. I feel it would be the grossest sin if I were to oppose any resistance to this force. And he deplored the inadequacy of current theological understanding. He said, I only wish the theologians would accept the Kabbalah so as to proclaim more clearly how God reveals himself. A Kabbalah, just a Hebrew word, simply means received. The Kabbalah is a body of oral teaching handed down from the earliest founders of Judaism. It deals with the nature of God and his or her relationship with the universe, in particular with human beings. The Kabbalah is an emanationist cosmology. The universe emanated from God, flowed out, and will eventually flow back into God. So now we're having a look at the tree of life in a form that you can understand. So I'll just have a look at that talk while I'm looking at it too. There you'll see up the top Kether, the crown. This is the origins of God's manifestation. And there's another slide, the next one there, Robert, that gives you a bit of an idea of what happens. It's just sort of it looks like a lightning flash. It's slide number. Anyway, no, one before that, if it's on there.
It's on the Zoom, but it's not.
Okay. We'll go back to.
It's number 16 on the.
Yeah. Okay. We'll go back to the other slide. So, well, you'll notice it's a bit like a tree, and it's got three limbs in it, and the lightning flash from God comes down through Kether, and it goes into Chokmah, which is wisdom, then across to Binah, understanding, then down to Hesed, mercy, then across to Gevurah, on the left-hand side, judgment, down through Tiferet, which we talked about, Tiferet, beauty and truth, then to Netzach, then to Hod, thought, then to Yesod, foundation, down to Malkut, the kingdom. But the two Sephirot that we're interested in, Sephirot is the name for each of those circles. They're all manifestations of God. The two we're particularly interested in tonight are Tiferet and Malkuth. And the marriage is between Tiferet and Malkuth. The tree, and the right-hand column is associated with the masculine, and the left-hand column is associated with the feminine. It's not unlike the yin-yang system, where you have the yin, which is the passive element, female, the yang, the masculine element. They contrast, but there's a middle way, a compromise way. I think in the system that they call it the Tao, the way. Well, the equivalent to that is the central column, the column that starts from Kether on the top, going down to Kether, Yesod, and Malkuth. So these images first appeared in medieval Europe, in southern France, southern Italy, northern Spain. A lot of other developments were going on at about that time. So the tree of life is a sort of template that can be used not only for the understanding of who or what God is, but for understanding how the human psyche functions. Well, the Kabbalah begins with the notion of Ein Sof. And so we'll have a look at that other slide there now. Number 2, Ein Sof, does that come up? Oh, we got it. Well, that doesn't mean anything, but it looks pretty. The thing about the Ein Sof is that no one really knows what it is. Ein Sof, 2 Hebrew words, Ein, there is not, Sof, end, there is not end. Eternity. Infinity. It's a state of existence beyond time and space. Even to call it existence is misleading. It's a no thing, and it's everything. It's every possibility. It's complex of all opposites. It's not good. It's not evil. It's not light. It's not dark. It's not male. It's not female. It's both. It's absolute unity. It's the absolute monad. It's past, present, and future, all in one instant. It's nowhere and it's everywhere. It has been called the pleroma by the Greeks, early Greeks, the Neoplatonists, the pleroma or the fullness, and in the medieval times with the scholastics, they would call it the Godhead. So the Kabbalah myth, in line with the book of Genesis, speculated that the Godhead wanted to experience a relationship. It wanted to behold itself face to face. And it decided to create an image of itself that would totally reflect all that it was. As the Genesis says, let us make man in our own image, in the likeness of ourselves. Now we've got a slide that's coming up now called, it's called the Shekinah, the divine immanence. Shekinah, again from Hebrew word shakan, to dwell. It's a central figure in Jewish mysticism, and that's a she. She's the female face of God. She personalises the total immanence of God in all creation. So the little pic there gives a suggestion of total immanence. She's also known as wisdom, or Sophia, or the Holy Spirit, and often symbolised by the figure of a dove. I think we can see a dove in the middle of that, can't we? And in the tree of life that we've looked at, she's in particular associated with two Sephiroth, Binah and Malkut. Now I'm just going to talk about this lady, Shekinah, her relationship with Binah. And in this connection, she's a mother and a lover, a divine mother and a lover. There's an English lady called Anne Baring, a Jungian analyst. She's retired now, but highly esteemed and a writer in spiritual and mythological traditions. Anne Baring, look her up on the net. Anyway, she talks about the Kabbalah and the Hieros Gamos. She puts it this way. The mythology of this tradition restores the image of the sacred marriage in the union of a divine mother-father in the ground of being. There is not a mother and a father, but a mother-father who remain one in their eternal embrace, one in their ground, one in their emanation, one in ecstasy and continuous act of creation. No other offers the same breathtaking vision of the union of the male and female energies in the one that is both. The Song of Songs was the text most used by Kabbalists for their contemplation of the mystery of this divine union. Yet one has the feeling that this way to union with the divine may descend from some unknown source that nourished Egypt, Sumer, and India. Now, the next one is the Empress. You probably may be familiar with the story about the little girl in class who was a drawing. The nun was teaching a religious class, and what was she drawing? She was sort of hiding it a bit, and Sister Elizabeth went to her and said, "Mary, what are you drawing?" And she said, "I'm drawing God." And the nuns paused for a while. I said, "But no one knows what God looks like." "They will now," she said. So this is a bit of she will now. What does God the Mother look like? That's a card from the tarot, the Empress. People familiar with the tarot? I mean, people come across the tarot? The Empress. Just some words about the tarot. I use the tarot every day as part of morning meditation. I get inspiration from the cards. It's as if they trigger something from my unconscious, which contains all sorts of feelings and insights that my conscious mind has got no idea about. Dr. Jung endorses both the tarot and the Kabbalah. There's an elaborate tradition of how the Kabbalah and the tarot images connect, but it's a very big subject now. But I'm just going to go on a little bit because Anne Baring, with the quote I just mentioned, talks about their eternal embrace. In other words, the marriage is not a one-off. It's constantly going on, the eternal embrace of the divine, in this case, Binah or Shekinah, and God. And from the marriage comes a child. And we need to talk about this child for a sec, because the Kabbalah it's not only the marriage that's ongoing, but it's the regeneration and the rebirth is ongoing. The divine child, Tiporeth, is constantly being born from the divine trio. You might remember the top three trio in the chart that we looked at, Ketha, Hokmah, and Binah. This constant birth, the birth of the Christ child, illustrates this. It's a one-off event in history, but we celebrate it each year. And yet there's a sense that it's an ongoing event, and that it is happening, or at least can happen, in everyone. St Augustine, a great 4th century father of the church, said, "What does it avail me if this birth, the birth of Christ the Son in eternity, is always happening, if it does not happen in me? That it should happen in me is what happens. Therefore we shall speak of this birth, of how it may take place in us." And Dr. Jung had a similar intuition. In a section of the Red Book entitled The Way of What Is to Come, he speaks of an inner child to be created in him. The human psyche will be the birthplace of the new God image. So he writes in the Red Book, "The spirit of the depths taught me that my life is encompassed by the divine child. From his hand, everything unexpected came to me, everything living. This child is what I feel as an eternally springing youth in me." Now, this divine child who is to come, as Jung imagines it, will not be the first divine child. The infant of Bethlehem, Jeshua bar Joseph, came to be known as the Christ, was a God-man. But Jung sees the need for a new God image. Jesus as God was a sinless one. For Jung, he was not the typical human being, with no dark side. The new God image for Jung must contain all the opposites, the good and the evil. The coming divine child, says Jung, will choose as his birthplace the empirical man. Birth of the new Christ child, the empirical humanity, shadow side and all, brings about what Jung calls a Christification of many. And Jung noted the difference between the general Christian understanding of the incarnation and of the Kabbalah. And he says this: the characteristic difference is that God's incarnation is understood to be a historical fact in the Christian belief, while in the Jewish gnosis, short for Kabbalah, it is an entirely pleromatic process, happens in the pleroma, symbolised by the concentration of the supreme triad of Kether, Chokmah and Binah in the figure of Tiphareth. So two contrasting understandings of how it works. Now, I'm quite comfortable with both interpretations being true. And the tarot figure for the divine child is the sun. Now, just going on to our friend Shekinah's relationship with Malkuth, the kingdom. Now, Malkuth is the kingdom. All of the emanating godness finishes up here in the kingdom at the bottom. There's no part or aspect of the universe that is not of God. The Shekinah is the name given to the universal presence of God in Malkuth. We human beings, we're the conscious aspect of Malkuth. So the Shekinah and humanity, us, we're intimately immersed in each other. Now Malkuth, the kingdom, and therefore humanity, became estranged from the Ein Sof. The book of Genesis describes a fall, an act of disobedience when Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now God is annoyed, to put it mildly, because as the book of Genesis explains, he sees Adam and Eve as seeking to be like him. So they're expelled from the garden. Yet they are still essentially of God. Their godness is expelled along with them. And the Kabbalists refer to this as the exile of the Shekinah. The rift between God and humanity has become a rift within God. And I'll just have another look at another card here, the High Priestess. Anyway, it's the task of humans to repair the division with God, to return the Shekinah from exile. And the associated tarot card is the High Priestess. And she's quite important in this story about the marriage, in a marriage. Actually, when you look at the image of the High Priestess, you might note some of the things Anne Baring was talking about. There's a touch of Egypt there, and there's a touch of India, and a touch of Samaria. So we're really talking about a tradition that goes way back beyond the foundations of Christianity. As Anne Baring says, we may be talking about a whole deeper way of achieving union with the divine. You know, the relationship between God and humanity and the world, long been a marriage, just a marriage between Yahweh and Israel. The prophet Isaiah talks about the bride and the groom, Isaiah about husband and wife, and the relationship is often marked by estrangement, followed by reconciliation. And the outstanding text in the Bible is the Song of Songs, which tells of the separated bride and bridegroom searching for each other and finally reuniting. And this is a cosmic picture, but the cosmic picture is mirrored at the individual level. As above, so below. It's a Hermetic principle. Now, Bernard of Clairvaux, a 10th century Benedictine monk, interpreted the Song of Songs as relating to the search of the human soul and God for each other. And that's not unlike Dr. Jung's view. Jung believed that the God image and the inner self-image, they're psychologically indistinguishable. Our image of God, our image of the centre of ourselves. The inner self-image is the centre of our whole psyche, both the unconscious and the conscious parts. Now, we participate in the Hieros Gamos via our own inner marriage, which is between our ego, the centre of consciousness, and our self. It's a lifelong endeavour, and it's a mutual searching, which Jung called individuation. It's through which we become whole. And it's a work in progress. Few ever get there. Maybe Jesus Christ did, maybe the Buddha, maybe some of the great mystics. The next marriage is the marriage of the Lamb, and Dr. Jung describes how his vision shifted. Marriage of the Lamb. I picked these things out because they seem to catch the notion I was trying to explain. But Dr. Jung writes, "There followed the marriage of the Lamb in a Jerusalem festively bedecked. These were ineffable states of joy. I myself was the marriage of the Lamb." It was the same marriage. Again, he felt he was the marriage. My beatitude was that of a blissful wedding. Now, the image of the Lamb features prominently in the Judeo-Christian scriptures. Book of Numbers requires 2 yearling lambs without blemish to be offered, one in the morning and one at night. And at the time of the deliverance of the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt, the Israelites were commanded to slaughter a lamb and smear the blood on the lintel doorpost of their dwelling. The angel of death was sent to kill all the firstborn sons in Egypt. He's instructed to pass over the dwellings marked by the blood of the lamb. The firstborn sons of the Hebrew slaves were spared, but not the Egyptians. Pharaoh allowed the Jews to leave Egypt. And the Feast of the Passover commemorates the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. They were saved by the blood of the Lamb. The sacrificed lamb was then, and continues to be, eaten in the ritual Passover meal. The Jewish people, by assimilating the sacrificed lamb, in a sense, became identified with it. And this process of identification with the Lamb continued with Jesus of Nazareth. John the Baptist, an apocalyptic figure, a contemporary of Jesus, was clear about it. "Look, there is the Lamb of God," he said to his followers, as he pointed to Jesus. And just as the Jewish people were commanded to eat the sacrificed lamb, Jesus instructed his followers to eat and drink his body and blood. "Take and eat, this is my body. Take, drink, this is the cup of my blood." Still today, in the Catholic Mass, the priest holds up the consecrated bread and says, "Behold the Lamb of God," before he gives it to the communicants. And John also referred to Jesus as a bridegroom. He calls himself the friend of the bridegroom and says he rejoices greatly on hearing his voice. Jesus himself refers to himself as a bridegroom and using wedding analogies in his teaching. And on Calvary, in the event of the crucifixion, we can see a combination of themes. Jesus is the sacrificed lamb. He is of one body with his followers, who have eaten his body and drunk his blood under the form of bread and wine. And at the moment of his death, as in John's Gospel, Christ cried out, "It is consummated." Consummated. Consummated, as in a marriage. And this is how St Augustine, the great 4th century father of the church, saw it. He wrote, like a bridegroom, Christ went forth from his chamber. He came to the marriage bed of the cross, and there, in melting it, he consummated his marriage. Celebration of the marriage was to follow. In the dimension of the unus mundus, the one world, there's no distinction between past, present and future. It's already happened. Dr. Jung is there. I was the marriage, he said. There followed the marriage of the Lamb. And John, the author of the book of Revelations, also caught a glimpse of the coming celebration. Let us be glad and joyful and give praise to God, because this is the time for the marriage of the Lamb. Then Jung's vision shifted from the marriage of the Lamb to the marriage of Zeus and Hera. Well, the myths of ancient Greece tell us that Zeus was an heroic figure, most powerful of all the gods. He decided Hera, the beautiful daughter of Cronos, should be his wife. The marriage was hugely celebrated. Lots of feasting and merriment. All the deities were in attendance, and they presented them with lots of magnificent gifts. Gaia, the earth goddess and grandmother to the bride, gifted Hera with an enchanted tree that, when planted, would produce exquisite golden apples. And once the festivities came to an end, Zeus and Hera had a glorious wedding night. There are reports the honeymoon lasted 300 years. I don't think Jung was there all of that time. You know, the couple endured a rocky relationship. Zeus was quite a philanderer. And Hera spent a lot of her time punishing the women he had affairs with. But the marriage did endure. Despite the clash of powerful personalities, they still present as a unitary whole, something holy, sanctified. Actually, Dr. Jung uses the expression inexpressible sanctity to describe the atmosphere surrounding the visions. And this applied equally to Zeus and Hera as it did to Tiphareth and Malkuth, or to the Lamb and his bride. What we know of both Zeus and Hera suggests they were far from being saints. At least that's what our conventional view today might be. But Dr. Jung said he learned to affirm things as they are, an unconditional yes to that which is, without subjective protests. Acceptance of the conditions of existence as I see and understand them. Acceptance of my own nature as I happen to be. So, the marriage visions, what do they look like to you? Well, to me, they sound like dreams and hallucinations. I think that to most people. But Dr. Jung was vehement in asserting that they were objectively real. He wrote, "I would never have imagined that any such experience was possible. It was not a product of imagination. The visions and the experience were utterly real. There was nothing subjective about them. They all had the quality of absolute objectivity." So perhaps we have to accept that there are other dimensions to objective reality that defy our capacity to explain. The ultimate oneness of the Kabbalah may in some way bond everything, the physical and the spiritual, the actual and the imaginary, into an indescribable whole. And Dr. Jung seems to have tasted this. He said, one is interwoven into an indescribable whole, and yet observes it with complete objectivity. Now, the weddings, though quite different, they became one in the consciousness of a person. I was the wedding. It's a mystery how so many different events, circumstances, and emotional responses could become one. Now, Dr. Jung tried to tackle this in his last great work, Mysterium Conjunctionis. In this instance, Jung's consciousness became a unifying factor. Is his consciousness, and our consciousness as well, a component, a drop in the ocean, as it were, of a single universal consciousness? Is consciousness and godness the same stuff, the fundamental stuff of the universe? And this may be the insight that the Bible offers us when it says that everything arose out of a conscious intention. Let there be, said God. Let us make, said God. Genesis 1. In the unus mundus, the one world scenario, no distinction between the components that make it up, between whatever they originate from and whatever they are. So, as the scholastics would argue, everything originated from consciousness, ergo, everything is consciousness. My good friend Shauna will have trouble with that. Dr. Jung's experience was completely unexpected and profoundly life-changing. He tasted the bliss of the heavenly wedding. It gave him a feel for eternity, which never left him. St Thomas Aquinas. Two. People heard of St Thomas Aquinas? He's a Dominican scholastic, 12th century. You know, one of the great minds of all time. He too had a life-changing experience, and the story of his last hours on earth, describing his encounter with the Shekinah, may be found in Aurora Consurgens. No, we're going back to, not this one. We're looking for another slide.
Robert, go back. Sorry?
That's on the slide. There we are.
That's the one, Aurora Consurgens.
Oh, yes, yes,
Got him?
yes.
Dark lady, angel, in the Song of Songs. The beloved was swarthy, who spent all the time in the sun. And this particular one, this lady's angel's foot stuck in a dark mass. Anyway, the Aurora Consurgens, it's the name of a text attributed to Thomas Aquinas. I'm going to spend a little bit of time about this. It's a commentary on the Song of Songs. And as you know, that's a biblical book, a poem about separated lovers searching for and finding each other. Now, Thomas, constant traveller, had stopped at a monastery in northern Italy. He was very ill, but he was pressed to give a seminar to the monks. They couldn't let a chance go by. He had the famous Father Thomas. Thomas knew he was dying. He chose to speak on the Song of Songs. And so the scholars tell us the document we have was written in medieval Latin shorthand. Latin's bad enough anyway, but medieval shorthand's really tough. And the document we have seems to come from notes taken by listeners at the seminar. Now, Aurora Consurgens is a weird text in many ways. Reads more like a dream or an hallucination. There are many alchemical references and frequent citing of non-Christian authorities. And the author often seems to be in a disturbed state of mind. He speaks of being in a place of darkness, searching for a female companion. And then a female figure speaks. And Thomas first refers to her as the Queen of the South. This is the Queen of Sheba. People know some of their Old Testament history. The Queen of Sheba was the one who visited Solomon. And the Song of Songs, Solomon's reputed author of the Song of Songs, and it derives from his love affair that he had with the Queen of Sheba. Anyway, in the dream, she's trapped in matter, and she's also searching for someone who will rescue her from darkness. It's the same story as the exiled Shekinah, Remember the exile of the Shekinah we talked about a little? It's trapped in matter as a result of the fall. Now, Thomas seems to merge with the wisdom Shekinah figure, so that she seems to become the speaker of the author. The mutual searching and the finally discovery of each other is likened to the rising dawn after a dark night. Aurora Consurgens, the rising dawn. Thomas is said to have died as he commented on the words, "Come, my beloved, let us go into the fields. There you will give me your love." Now, Dr. Jung saw in Aurora Consurgens a credible case study how the partners and the Hieros Gamos come together. And he asked his collaborator, Marie-Louise von Franz, to write it up. She was much better at medieval Latin shorthand than he was. So she's responsible for the last part of Jung's great work, Mysterium Conjunctionis. She devotes part of her book, Alchemy, which is in the library here, to Aurora Consurgens. Actually, the story of how Thomas's seminar ended up in this book is quite an interesting detective story. But anyway, Aurora Consurgens was chosen by Jung to be the focus of the third and final part of Mysterium Conjunctionis. Mysterium Conjunctionis was, in Jung's view, the completion and final bringing together of his life's work. It deals with the mystery of how the opposites which constitute the universe, good, evil, attraction, repulsion, male, female, spiritual, material, heaven, earth, imaginary, real, so on, how they come together to form the unus mundus, the one world. Well, what had happened to Father Thomas? Toward the end of his life, he'd stopped writing. When pressed to continue his work, he simply said, "I cannot." He seemed to those near him that he'd gone crazy. He would remain all day in a catatonic state. The only explanation for failing to write was, "All I have written is straw." Now, Dr. Jung analysed, of course, this story. He felt that Thomas had been overwhelmed by the unconscious, and Marie-Louise von Franz agreed, adding that she believes Aurora Consurgens is the text of a dying person. She wrote about this story, "At the end, there is a description of the mystical marriage resulting in the tradition that death is a kind of mystical marriage with the other half of the personality." Now, Thomas's whole life had been turned upside down. Thomas, the committed celibate monk, supremely rational, so revered as the greatest thinker in the Holy Roman Empire. His life and work have been dominated by the masculine logos. And suddenly he's overwhelmed by a powerful inrush of the feminine eros. "I've gotcha," she said. He tells the assembled monks about his encounter with the Queen of the South. He tells them, "All good things come to me through her. She is the tree of life for everybody who understands her, and a light which is never extinguished. She seems easy to those who know of her, for she goes around and seeks the one worthy of her. She goes towards him full of pleasure and meets him in each providence, because her beginning is from the truest nature, from which no deceit comes." Then Marie-Louise von Franz and Alchemy takes us through Thomas's seminar. He describes what he's experienced and tries to explain it. His mood changes from deep depression to being puzzled to engaging with the Queen of the South and coming to recognise her as the wisdom of God. At least 6 times he recounts his experience. And at times the voice we hear is the voice of wisdom, Shekinah, as if Thomas is channeling her, albeit unconsciously. And at times he seems to present as the Son of God. He does not seem to understand what he's saying. And then he'd revert to the calm, prosaic logic of a scholastic theologian. The following extracts taken from Marie-Louise Franz's Alchemy illustrate the sequence. First of all, Thomas speaks. Looking from afar, I saw a big cloud, which having been absorbed by the earth, covered it with blackness and covered my soul, which the waves had entered, so that they became corrupted from the aspect of the deepest hell and the shadow of death. And then the author speaker seemed to become the Queen of the South. And it's a female voice you hear. I have cried the whole night until I am tired. My throat is hoarse. Who is the man who lives, understanding and knowing, who can save my soul from the hand of the underworld? He who enlightens me will have eternal life. He for whose love I am longing, in whose fire I am melting, in whose perfume I live, from whose taste I am becoming healthy, and whose milk I am nourishing myself, and whose embrace my whole body melts away. To him I will be father, and he will be my son. The Queen of the South is identifying with the Father. Wise is he who brings joy to his Father, to whom I will give the highest place among the kings of the earth, and with whom I will keep my covenant forever. And she continues on this as the Father. And she says, when my barns, this is Thomas's voice, you know, but it's the female figure speaking. When my barns have been filled with corn, and the bridegroom has entered my bridal chamber, and when my body has been impregnated by the touch of my bridegroom, then the time will be fulfilled, and then God will send his Son, to once he said, "Thou art my Son, this day I have begotten thee." But just as wisdom has been pining for a rescuer, Thomas has been desperately searching. He says, "Turn towards me with your whole heart and do not reject me. I cry from the depth and from the abyss of the earth. I will arise and go into the town and seek in the alleys and the streets if I may find a chaste virgin, beautiful in face and body. Incline thy ear towards me and listen to my prayer, for with my whole heart I have longed for thy beauty. I have spoken in my language. Tell me the number of my days, for thou hast circumscribed my days, and my substance is as nothing before thee." Then wisdom answers. Here, the godness of wisdom is apparent. Wisdom is God. "Hearken, all nations, perceive with your ears, my red bridegroom has spoken. He asked and has received. I am the flower of the field and the lily of the valleys. I am the mother of beautiful love and of holy recognition and holy hope. I am the bed of my beloved. I am beautiful and without flaw. I kill and I make alive. Neither is there any that can deliver out of my hand. I offer my mouth to my beloved, and he kisseth me. He and I are one. Who can separate us from our love? No one, in length or breadth, for our love is stronger than death." Thomas responds, "O my beloved bride, thy voice has sounded in my ears and is sweet. You are beautiful. Come now, my beloved. Let us go out into the field and let us dwell in the villages. We will see if thy vineyard has blossomed and if it has borne fruit. There thou wilt give me thy love. Nobody shall be excluded from our happiness. We will live in a union of eternal love and will say how good and lovely it is to live two in one." So little wonder the Dominican order, as well as the church authorities, distance themselves from these words from Thomas. Here we have the master of Catholic orthodoxy on his deathbed, declaring that God is a woman, offering herself to him as a lover, and he accepts. We will live in a union of eternal love. Not exactly what a group of celibate monks would expect to hear from Father Thomas. Look, I'll just conclude by having a look at that last slide, the image of planet Earth. I've labelled it Shekinah, Earth, Shekinah. We talked about Shekinah, this feminine presence of God. Well, the blue dot in space, it's a bit more than the third drop from the sun. It teems with life, and through its human component, it's us, we're bits of Earth, is conscious and self-conscious. And the Kabbalist understanding that the Shekinah is identified with the Earth community. The separation of the Earth community from God, a consequence of the duality inherent in the act of creation, resulted, as you will recall, in the exile of the Shekinah. She's in anguish. We've just heard that from the dialogue. Who can save my soul from the hand of the underworld? Well, the hand of the underworld is active in the world today. Environmental disaster threatens. UN Secretary General a couple of weeks ago told us the world's hanging by a thread. So exploitation of the Earth's resources for the profit of the few, but the impoverishment of the many dominates human activity. Major institutions, church, state, civil, they're failing us. Human communities are marginalised. War threatens. Pandemics strike. Extreme weather events disturb us. Living species are becoming extinct. So humanity's relationship to the Earth must change from exploitive dominance to one of respectful partnership. And a sacred marriage may be the way to go. Kabbalists saw all creation as a manifestation of God, and at its heart is the femininity of God, the wisdom of God. She's known to Christians as Sophia, the Holy Spirit, to Jews as the Shekinah, and to tarot tragics as the High Priestess. She's beautiful, and she's reaching out to us. So perhaps Father Thomas's dying words could help us reflect on how we should respond to her. Oh, my beloved bride, my beloved husband, thy voice has sounded in my ears and is sweet. You are beautiful. Come now, beloved. Let us go into the field and dwell in the villages. We will see if thy vineyard has blossomed and if it has borne fruit. There thou wilt give me thy love. Nobody shall be excluded from a happiness. We will live in a union of eternal love, and will say how good and lovely it is to live two in one.
I'd like to say thank you very much, Terry. You always give us a lot to think about in your talks, and we're so clear, beautifully orchestrated, and I didn't go to sleep, so there we are. I'm the world's worst because I've been teaching all week, and it's been a very tiring week for the children coming back into school. So I'm a bit tired tonight, but you just done a marvellous job. Thank you very much. Everyone give him a clap again. I appreciate people coming in to speak because so I'd just like to come and sit down, and we'd like to come and sit down so we can get started. Poor old Terry's getting tired. You can come and sit down.
Can you just check if this microphone's working? Is it working? Is this coming through on your
So we'd like everyone to come and sit down now. We want to get started. That would be very nice.
Gary, we'll use this microphone so that people can speak into that microphone if they're asking questions, and you can speak into that one as well. So we'll just use that one.
Okay. Sure.
It's on. I'd like to open up the question time if we can. So can I use the microphone? I'd just like to first thank you so much, Terry, for a really profound presentation. You've really distilled so much of the wisdom of the ages and of your experience in life into what you've shared with us. And I think that this concept of the holy marriage is one that's got really great theological profundity, because one of the problems that we have with Christian theology is the theory of God as male, and even the theory of the Trinity as male. So where you were noting that often Sophia and the Holy Spirit within the mystical traditions are understood as feminine, and yet we see that the orthodoxy has expressed that maleness. And so I think Jung was standing in a wonderful ancient tradition that is deeply mystical and that recognizes this equality of both the male and female principles within life and the universe. So, for example, the marriage of heaven and earth as another symbolism of the holy marriage. And but this sense that the orthodox tradition of the church has been corrupted in failing to recognise this equality of the male and female, and that's a really big part of the problem of the church today, because people can see that there's an ethical, a moral need to recognise the equality of male and female. But if a patriarchal monotheistic tradition insists no, men are superior, then it brings itself into contempt in the broader society. So I think, those are some of the issues that come out of this really profound tradition that you've been sharing with us, from my understanding.
Yes, in the early church, there were different groups of followers of Jesus. And one of the groups was called the Church of Mary Magdalene. And there's a Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Of course, it was not admitted into the canon of the scriptures. So the ones we have now are the traditional ones of the four Gospels and certain letters of Paul. There are lots of other scriptures, and they make very interesting reading. And especially the fight or the argument between Peter and Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene is the first of the apostles, chosen by Jesus to be the first one to announce his resurrection. And she went to the assembled apostles and had lots of things to tell them about the message of Jesus. The reaction of the men was, he would not speak these things to you, a woman, without saying them to us. And a division occurred in the church. The patriarchal side won out, Peter and Andrew, whereas Thomas and Mary Magdalene, they lost the argument. And it's the old story that history is written by the winners. So a patriarchal group who inherited the authoritarian structures of the priests devised their system of management, included bishops and included canon, and included rules about which traditions were the right ones. So the scriptures were restricted to present a patriarchal theme, and it continued now to the present time. In 1945, they discovered a lot of more texts in the Hakamadi area in Egypt, and a lot of Gnostic writings have come out of that, and now we're able to see a bit more clearly what these alternative traditions were in the early church. But it caused a lot of harm. And if you exclude the feminine from institutions, it's going to come back and bite you badly. Like poor old Thomas. He's living a good celibate, logos-dominated life. And Lady Eros wasn't having anything of that. She came up and grabbed him. And it's going to happen. It's happening now in the church. A bit slow.
Yeah, it's interesting that, yes, oh, thank you. Yes, it's interesting that when I was 16 or so, that of course I just thought God was masculine, Jesus is masculine, and they're all the disciples and so on. And I was interested in looking at different churches, and I got into the Christian Science Church for a year or so. And it's just interesting that these ideas of the femininity of God come out again and again, and it can't be suppressed. So in Christian Science, you have the Father-Mother God, for example, again and again. So, it's impossible to suppress those ideas that come out, whether you want to see them or not.
I'd like to ask another question, but anyone is very welcome to comment or ask questions of Terry. We've got another half hour. I'd like to comment on the Kabbalistic and tarot tradition that Terry's that you've covered in your talk. Now, one of the things that I find really interesting in reading the Bible is that the tree of life, which is symbolized by the Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic tree of life, it appears in the Bible twice. It appears first in the Garden of Eden, where it's a symbol of paradise, the lost paradise, which humans have been separated from by the fall from grace. And then it doesn't appear again, except for a brief mention in, I think, Proverbs or Psalms, until the very last chapter of the Bible, where it says that the future redemption of the world is the reunion between humanity and the tree of life. And so you've got this sense that all of the time within this mythological framework, from the fall from grace through to the return of Christ, is a fallen state where we're separated from the tree of life. And so it's this question of how this sort of wisdom tradition within the Kabbalah has retained some sort of mystical memory from deeply ancient times of what is the tree of life? Like what does it mean? What's this theory of emanation? These all of these stations on the tree of life, or what you call them within Kabbalah. How does that fit into some sort of hidden wisdom that needs to be restored into the world?
Not sure I know what the answer would be, but your comment about trees for life is correct. But the roots of the Kabbalah are pretty murky. So there are certain traditions that say they go right back to the very earliest years of humanity. But they can't establish that. It's like a lot of these traditions which take shape at a later stage have such a deep root to them that it's hard to determine it. Anne Baring, she said, one gets the feel that the Kabbalah system goes back to ancient Egypt, to ancient Sumeria, and to ancient India. And one of the tarot cards that we looked at, the High Priestess, you really could see the signs of Cyrus and Osiris, and much more ancient. So the course by which these things come into modern times, I'm not too sure. That the Hermetic tradition seems to have developed from Egypt, and this is the basic axiom that as above, so below. So that there's a macrocosm that's represented by the universe, and there's a microcosm that's represented by us as individuals. And what occurs at the macrocosm level occurs in the human being. So the human being is if you like, a complete model of the macrocosm. And so this connection between what's happening at a universal level and what's mirrored in the individual is one of the core Kabbalistic themes. But just how, I really don't have an answer to how that may have evolved. You know, a lot of the religious practices were derived from agricultural requirements, like for example, the notion of life and death and resurrection associated with the planting of seeds. They grow and they die. You pray for, or you make a sacrifice so that the next season they'll come to life once more. So this cycle of life and death, and the cycle of birth and regeneration, is very Kabbalistic. I get a bit lost in tacking them all together, but there's the notion of the one world and the big picture is something that the Platonists and the Egyptians wrote about, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And it's interesting that the Kabbalah seemed to develop the tree of life, developed in northern Spain, southern France, and northern Italy, at around about the time of the persecution by the church of the Jews and the Cathars. The Cathars were a group of Christians who opposed the teaching of Rome, very largely because of the involvement of the feminine. The Cathars had a tradition that Jesus was married, and that it was very important to retain the presence of the feminine in the leadership of the church. This more than upset the Pope at the time, and he ordered a crusade against the Cathars. It was called the Albigensian Crusade, and they went down into southern France and Provence, and they actually slaughtered many thousands of people. The Cathars, though, had their doctrine of what they called the doctrine of love, the Church of Amour, which opposed to the Church of Roma, same letters but twisted around. And so they developed a system of secret cards that could spread their teachings And if you look at these ancient cards, you can see where a large number of the tarot cards derive from. That was an interesting thing to me, and to see how gradually different traditions put the Kabbalah tree of life together with the tarot cards. So quite an interesting story in itself. But the point here is that the Cathars advocated the importance of equal leadership, equal partnership of the feminine in the affairs of the Christian faith.
Terry, I was going to just talk about how you said Jung, for him, this was more real than anything when he was in marriage. And just the idea of these heightened states, like I spoke to a woman who'd been psychotic, and for her, she realised the psychosis wasn't real, but she'd had these two other experiences. One was an experience with Jesus, and one was what she described as a near-death experience where she went to hell. And she had no doubt that they were real. And where I've been psychotic and I know what my experiences were like, and to me, there was something real about them, even though, you know, if you kind of argue from a scientific view of the world, what I perceived as real couldn't be real. But those heightened experiences of reality or shift in consciousness seem to reflect something that's more real than a normal waking state that we're in now. And it seems like Jung's having this heightened experience. And I guess what I'm getting at is that if you talk about what, say, the normal waking state we're in now isn't the ultimate reality, and there is this kind of ultimate reality that we can have direct access to, and it's going to manifest differently through these heightened experiences. And it seems, and I'm not saying the psychosis seems to be just quite a disturbing distortion of it, but his experience is like a mystical experience, which is kind of, it's manifested for him, this kind of ultimate thing. And just the idea that we can experience these states that somehow seem more real. And like he said, he said it was an objective reality. And yet, you know, I guess from a scientific point of view, the state we're in now is a real state, and these altered states are kind of, there's something, you know, perhaps going wrong with the brain, or, you know. So I'm not sure what my point is, but I'm really interested in, you know, how these experiences can seem more real than normal reality, even though they have this kind of added layer of some kind of story that is not present in our normal waking state. You know, there's some kind of story going on that he experienced, which is this sacred marriage, or, you know, in a psychosis, there's some kind of religion, if it's religious, you know, there's some kind of story going on. So anyway, I don't know what my question is with that, but, you know.
It's okay, I don't know what the answer is. Yes, but this sense of reality that's more real than real, I think we have to be open to the idea that there is another dimension of reality, that it's not the same as our so-called real world, and the world where we measure things and time things and so forth, the world of science, that there's another area. I mean, Jung used the expression when he said, you know, this was more more real than real. And occasionally, you know, many of us might have a little mystical experience, and we need to treasure those. I mean, some things stick out when it happens, and first is this sense of oneness, that there's a certain togetherness that you see something or you feel something, and you feel some bond of some sort with it, that your own personality or somehow merges with it. In Jung's case, he himself merged with the experience of the marriage. So this sense of oneness. And the other thing is there's tremendous clarity about these experiences, that suddenly everything is very, very clear. There's no doubt about it. And you have the feeling that if I can't be sure of that, you have this feeling, I can't be sure of anything. It's something you go back to and you've experienced, and because it touches you very deeply, you say to yourself, well, that's my rock of truth. I can't find anything more. I can read a thesis or I can hear someone talk, but it doesn't touch you deeply. So a mystical experience, just even though you can't explain it, leaves you with a sense of certainty. So I think Jung's experience makes us be prepared to accept that there are levels of reality well beyond what we can imagine. One of the things in the Kabbalah that I didn't talk about is that they posit 4 levels of existence, or 4 worlds of existence. There's a world of action. This is at the bottom where we're working away, but then there are other worlds of creation, formation, and emanation. And as you climb the scale of the Kabbalah, the ladder, you move gradually into upper worlds. But the upper worlds are characterized not by physical reality, but by some sort of consciousness that's not physical. And that's a non-answer to a non-question. But anyway, I agree with you that we need to be open to the possibility of accepting mystical experiences as valuable.
One thing I was curious about is, or I guess, my answer to the non-question, my own experience from how I understand the world to be, is that waking consciousness is kind of characterized by what you would call the archetypes, and then these archetypal symbols that work through that. And then it's also characterized by opposites. And so it's characterized
I'm not hearing very well, I'm
Do
sorry.
you want to stand up closer?
Sure. And then
Repeat what you said. Yes.
so that waking consciousness is characterized by these archetypes that Jung writes about, and he's got these sort of pairs of opposites. And then this Hieros Gamos is sort of one of those symbols that's actually beyond maybe these archetypal symbols, which can become like anagogical symbols, which are symbols that sort of transcend human experience towards the divine, towards something greater. And I was wondering, I've been reading William Blake recently, and a lot of his writings and a lot of his poems seem to basically have this at the base of his message. And I almost wonder if that was kind of, if William Blake's experience was sort of this, if that's what he was seeing, if his Hieros Gamos kind of was what his experience was. And he also writes a lot about the body and the nerves inside his body. And I wonder if in a sense he kind of entered into his body, uniting with the kind of analytical consciousness, which is sort of masculine logos, and then the femininity of the body, of feeling and intuition. And if that was sort of, he actually lived out that marriage, and that's why he saw what he saw.
That sounds possible to me, but I don't know. I do know that Blake was a prolific illustrator of Kabbalistic images, well, they look pretty weird and they look pretty way out, but he seems to have the sort of psyche that's in touch with that level of, not obscurity exactly, but that level of higher states of existence than that we're comfortable with here. I mean, Jung certainly felt that his experience was much more real than the everyday experience. In fact, he dreaded waking up. His experiences of the marriage went for a period of about 3 weeks, but they wouldn't kick in until the evening came. And then he would enter into the mystical state and live in it and be the marriage. But then when the morning came, he felt terribly trapped. His expression was, "I feel that a box has been created for me to live in." So here you have what to him was the real world. And our so-called real world was a tiny little container that was just set aside for you to rest in while you left it. So, I mean, this goes to the point that there is some level of existence that we really can't imagine.
Eric? Oh, it means Robbie. You.
Over here now.
Sorry, Glenn. I'm just late.
Firstly, I just wanted to say thank you, Terry, for a wonderful contribution to us all. And just before I go into what I was going to ask you, I wanted to just track back to what this Robbie mentioned about William Blake, and I was oh, so what was it? Willem. Okay, yeah. What Willem was saying about William Blake, and as you were describing touching on these concepts of oneness and mystical experience, I was reflecting back on my understanding of William Blake's epistemology. So he had this concept of knowledge about versus knowledge by constitution. And this knowledge by constitution to me seems very relevant to Hieros Gamos. He's not a subject-object, heady kind of intellectualization of existence, but it is the becoming of that and the complete embrace and immersion, the constitution of it. And I am really curious. I think we can describe all these historical weavings and the mythos of Hieros Gamos, but I am more curious about what it is that has driven you to become so captured by this concept, because you kind of alluded to, and you said one has an experience of oneness, but I got the sense that you may have had an experience or some experiences that might be described as Hieros Gamos-ish in nature. And I would love to hear about perhaps even the most compelling of those experiences, if you would care to share.
Okay.
Does this go back to you?
Well, yes, things happen. And I don't know, some synchronicities happen that pull you up. And often for me, it happens with the tarot cards. So not always, but sometimes, and I might get and the one that's associated more often is when the high priestess comes up, and I really can't explain it. It's a sense of being deeply cared for by something and of being somehow or another connected. I've tried to explain it to myself by saying, well, it's part of the unconscious, you know, that we have parts of ourselves. We have our conscious mind, but you know, 9/10 of us, like the iceberg, is unconscious, and there are things that are happening in there, and there's information in there that the conscious mind knows nothing about. So when you have what's called an experience, I mean, Sean has had plenty of them too, I bet. They're not unhealthy necessarily, but they're very powerful, and it leaves you fairly weak. And in fact, it'll leave you sobbing violently for some reason. You feel both shaken by it, and yet somehow or another blessed by being in contact with an other that has personness about it, and that you're in relationship with, and cares for you deeply. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a sense of gratitude and wonder and oneness, and completely unmanufactured. I mean, well, where these things come from, I don't know. And you know, the story. I mean, when I first got bitten by the tarot, I was at a conference. Well, it was quite some years ago now, and the speaker the next morning was a woman called Evelyn Joff, and she was going to talk on the relationship between the tarot and the Kabbalah. I'd never heard of her, and I was only at the conference because I needed to get some points. I'm a counsellor, a transpersonal counsellor. I need to get my professional points up, and going to Jungian conference is one of them. Anyway, that night I had a most vivid dream. It was the weirdest dream you could possibly imagine, and it involved lobsters coming out of a pond and crawling up onto the land, and me reaching out for them. And I didn't make too much. Well, so that was a weird dream. But when the lecture started the next morning, Evelyn said, a pack of tarot cards, and said, I want everyone to pick a card. It's random there. I picked up this card and turned it over. And it was the tarot card of the moon, which has the lobsters coming out of the pond. And, well, people would call it a synchronicity, I suppose. But it was a very strange thing to have happened. It weren't no coincidence, I can tell you that. And so there must be something in this. So I'd better have a look at it. And then I just gradually got more and more involved in the tarot and the Kabbalah. And but it also links in with my own personal spiritual life. It's a bit of a story there, I suppose, but then it seems important, important to me. But it's the notion of this other level of existence and is real. And it's also possible that people have these what's called unitive experiences much more commonly than you think. You know, you might be walking down the street, or you might be in a paddock or on the beach, and suddenly you feel extraordinarily connected with something beyond your day-to-day existence. And I think when that happens, you treasure those little things and maybe do something about them, just reflect on them. And it's probably because it's probably part of our spiritual growth and development. That's not anyway.
My name's Glenn, and thanks very much for the talk, and it's brought up something inside of me. Like there are different levels, you know, what my understanding of the subconscious, on spiritual levels and so forth. Is like I will visualise, I'll have a visualisation, it'll just hit me. Right? It's basically to do artistically, but if I'm thinking about something, or it will just hit me, and it transcends into the frontal lobe section of the mind. It's like a photo. Once that photo appears, you can always call on it to do your work. Okay? Does that come, the visualisation, does that come from compartments within the subconscious, or the subconscious is just a world of energy that anything pops out of it into your consciousness, or is it sectioned off, like, you know, that is to visualise whatever, you know, to visualise your art, to visualise your childhood, or is it? I know it's all interconnected, but these visualisations are very strong, and it just hits me. You know, it's yeah, and I just wondering what you thought about that to do with Jung's writings. Thank you.
I've been asked by a Zoom participant to repeat people's questions.
Oh, they're not coming through.
Oh, it's not coming through? No, okay, thanks. Yeah. But so I'll have a shot at repeating the question. It seemed to me you were talking about visualizations that appear from nowhere.
Yeah, they just come.
And
They're triggered, but I don't know what the trigger is.
And yeah, where might they come from? Jung was asked this question once, and he was asked about the God image. We have lots of images, but one of them is the God image that we have. His answer to that was, I don't know whether it creates itself or whether it's created by something else. Well, so he didn't know. I don't know, but I do notice though that one, they're unexpected. Don't seem to have any control over them. But they should be taken seriously. At the same time, it's possible that they're not helpful. So I believe we do have some sort of inner spirit. Some people have called a guardian angel or an inner spirit that looks after you. So I think it's important to appeal for help to your inner guide. You have to make some sort of act of faith that it has your interests at heart. But it is a protector, because it's quite possible that some of these things may lead you in the wrong direction. So we need protection too. So this sounds a bit strange, but when we were a little kid, we were taught a prayer. And I still say it, you know. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whose God's love commits me here, ever this day be at my side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. Well, you know, when I get some of these really weird things, I ask for protection. I don't think I've been let down yet, so anyway, if that tip's any useful.
We can finish up for the night. And thank you very much, Terry. You've given us so much to think about, and such in-depth discussions have happened tonight, so which is absolutely marvellous. And thank you for everyone contributing to that. And I'd like to, Terry, to give you a small token of appreciation to you.
Well, thanks very much.
It's only tiny, but we like to say. So next month we have Kirsten Robertson Gillen. She's going to talk